Alright, hi everyone. Sorry for the drink. Oh, that was the wrong piece of paper. This is the right piece of paper. So hi everyone, I'm Aster, and today I want to talk about memory and trauma and how it all works. This is based off my own research, this is based off of years of therapy, this is based off the few years I have of taking actual psychology classes and talking to lots of professionals and lots of other people who have brains. Because I think if you have a brain, you should be able to figure out how it works, at least in some high-level terms. I don't think you should need a special degree to know how your own mind works. So, let's start with some definitions. I hope you can see all of this. Definitions. Fuck my spelling. Trauma. Trauma is editing to the, what did I call it? Memory network, and we'll get to that in a minute. Trauma is the editing of the memory network without consent. So, other way I've heard trauma being explained is as a pain you can't escape. So it is something that has happened to you, that is out of your control, and has a great psychological effect. And there are all sorts of sources for trauma. We won't need to go into that right now. Core memory. Core memory. What did I say here? Well, that's really, you probably won't be able to see that. Let me switch markers. So core memory is the root of the memory network. It's the nucleation site upon which all your other memories are built. These usually develop early. They can develop later, but not as frequently. These are usually developed early, and they are usually based on raw sensory data. Smell of your mother's food, the imagery of childhood place, the sound of someone's voice who you care deeply about. Like, these are, it is the transition point between raw sensory data that we're taking in from the world and turning it into a usable story for our high-level brain. So in programming terms, like it's the compiler, right? This is kind of like the midpoint of the compiler. The compiler takes the high-level, almost English programming and converts it into machine code, the ones and zeros. And then we have interpretive memories. So, interpretation, I don't think I spelled that right. Story. So this is what is built off of the core memory. So you have the smell of the really tasty food that belonged to someone you care deeply about. And so your emotions too are also part of the sensory data, right? So it's often linked. So you have your sight or your smell linked with the emotion, and then you tell stories about, oh, my mom cooked tasty lasagna when I was a child, and that was really important to me. Now I love lasagna. Or like that story gets built fire. Oh, I love cooking now because I've had these experiences with food that are tied to strong emotional responses. So we'll say, let's use some different colors. Black and red, sure. Black will be a core memory. So that's the raw sensory data. That's the smell. That's the emotional association with that smell. And then you have the interpretations that get built on it and then get connected. So this interpretation on the left might be, I love lasagna. And the one on the right might be, I love cooking, right? And they're both related to this initial core memory of someone who cared for me deeply, made me this food, and maybe fall in love with it. And now these two might be linked, right? You might have a link between them, that you might specifically love cooking lasagna, right? And maybe it's not just cooking in general, or maybe it is cooking in general, but cooking like making ice cream. It's not really cooking, but that's another food thing. Making ice cream, that's over here. That's attached to the cooking interpretation, right? And that might base off of another core memory of, I don't know, you like being in the snow, you like cold things, so eating ice cream reminds you of the first time you put snow in your mouth. And so the first time you put snow in your mouth and got that new sensory data, that's this core memory, right? And so you keep adding these up and you start to build networks, right? So yes, that was stuff. So let's see here. Yeah, so you have one core memory formation. Two, to interpret core memory. Because a lot of our memories aren't, it's not just things you saw, heard, felt. It is your ideas about what those things mean to you, about what happened. So, like, you see someone, like, you get punched. Let's not even say you get punched, right? You're getting the pain signals, you see the fist coming at you. Well, who punched you? Was it a sibling and you were just having a playful tussle? Was it your nemesis and you're out for blood? Like, the raw data doesn't explain that. It is your interpretations of the raw data that get built on top of that give meaning to the raw data, the raw sensory data. So you have your core memory formation, and then you interpret what's going on. And then these get linked, as I explained. And the stories are kind of what link the things. So it's going back to the lasagna example, is person made you food, you appreciated it, now you know you really like cooking. That's also a memory. But the story of how you got there is, oh, I cooked the lasagna with my mom, and it was really tasty, and I remember it really well. And so that story links the core memory of lasagna good to the memory of, oh, I like to cook. Now, these connections, you can move across the network, right? You don't always remember that you like lasagna. You don't always remember you like to cook, because sometimes you're driving, and driving generally has nothing to do with cooking or lasagna. At least I hope in most cases. So you will be somewhere else in the network. You'll be, like, let's say this is driving, and then you have a few more points, right? Right? So your locus of control, your locus of focus, if you will, it moves around, right? So you might only be able to have, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5. I don't really have a research budget, so I couldn't tell you. It's probably different for everyone. Like, this is your focus, right? It moves around this network. And this gets to point number 4, which is, I wrote it as point number 5, but we'll do it as point number 4. You can move your focus. You can move your focus. So, if you're making ice cream, your focus is going to be up here. But then when you need to drive, you're going to get in the car. And the car is going to trigger your memory. You probably have some core memories about riding in the car with your parents, or about the first time you put your hands on the wheel, right? And that is going to inform your behavior in the car, because you're not going to need the same information you need to make lasagna that you do to pilot a vehicle. So you get in the car, and your external circumstances are going to influence where that focus is. So you get in the car, and that's going to trigger something in you. That's going to trigger, I need to drive now, right? And that brings you, I'll bring your focus down to here, to where the driving stuff happens, right? Now, you have free will. You do and you don't. You have the ability to control this focus. You will be, if you're sitting in a car, you are being informed by your surroundings to think about car things. But if you really wanted to, you could follow that chain of memories back to maybe one of them connected with the lasagna is like a delivery service. Like you Grubhubbed lasagna because you loved it so much. Or you were driving for Grubhub and you had to take some lasagna, right? And then so there's like this weird connection between driving and lasagna. And so you could be thinking about driving and be like, oh, you remember that time I delivered lasagna? And now you're thinking about cooking lasagna, right? While you're driving. So you have the ability to move this focus around this network. But it's hard because your body wants to respond to the raw sensory data that's going on around it. You know, we talk about state-based memory, we talk about location-based memory, all really powerful stuff. Like for trauma survivors, like for me, I cannot sleep in the house I grew up in. It is hard for me to even visit it. I get into a really dark place. I cry a lot. I want to end my own life when I am there because it is drawing that sensory data of being in that home is drawing up all those traumatic memories for me. It's drawing up all those feelings and is moving that focus. But I can also spend a little bit of time in there if I am working hard to focus on something else. So like my little brother. I love my little brother. I love spending time with him. And unfortunately, some of the only time I get to spend with him is in that house that's a very traumatizing place, or has been a very traumatizing place for me. But as long as I'm thinking about my brother and I'm keeping that locus of control there, I'm okay. I'm not running into the traumatic memories. In the TV show The Magicians, I think it's on Netflix, really good. I would highly recommend you check it out. There is an allegory of trauma and emotions and magic. So they talk about master wizards or master witches in master sorcerers, I don't remember the specific term they use, in The Magicians, as someone who can control their internal circumstances to allow them to cast any spell. Because a lot of the time you need like the moon to be in the right phase, you need the right weather outside, you need the right things going on, you need the right sensory information to accomplish your task, casting the spell. But the really powerful magic users have learned to control their internal circumstances to compensate for what's going on externally to allow them to cast whatever spell they want whenever they want. And it's kind of the same thing, right? Is you can learn to navigate this network regardless of what's going on outside. And like this is like what meditation helps with, this is what mindfulness helps with, this is what doing like creative process, like this is like art therapy or animal assisted therapy is helping with this, because you're getting signals in your brain from whatever is going on in your life that you need to be thinking about these traumatizing things. But then you do this other thing, you add a new node to the network that you can then use to like, you can use to shift your focus, if that makes sense, right? So for me, I do a lot of animal-assisted therapy, so I'm working with the animals. So now, when I'm in a really bad place, I can remember what it's like to pet a donkey. I feel so lucky. I love petting donkeys. They're very soft. And now I can feel, and I can tap into that calm I feel when I'm petting a donkey. And I know that I can navigate that network. So I have a friend who runs an animal sanctuary, and this is where I get to hang out with the animals and do my animal-assisted therapy. so this person has also seen me through a lot of dark times. So if I'm in a dark place, I can be like, all right, what would this friend say? Okay, well, that's gotten me to the farm. All right, what's on the farm? The donkeys. The donkeys are on the farm. Or the ducks. I love the ducks. Right, whatever animal it is I'm fancying that day. Okay, what's it like to feel? And I can remember what it's like to feel, to pet the donkey, and I can bring myself back to that place of peace. So, now, the other thing that makes this difficult is point number 5. Trauma screws things up, makes blocks. Now, trauma, this works in a couple of ways. Either trauma will create a new node. I should have a different color for trauma. How about this blue? Blue can be traumatic for us today. So we'll put this over here. That's the cooking lasagna. Yeah. So maybe you got food poisoning from lasagna one day, and now you just can't stand the stuff, and it was so bad it made you not want to cook anymore, because maybe it was lasagna you cooked. So now what would happen here, maybe you just don't want to cook lasagna. Let's just stick with that. It would destroy this connection between the you like cooking and you like lasagna, and it would make a new connection, right? Now, every time you see lasagna, or you try and eat lasagna, you think about that time you were puking your guts out. And it just makes you want to puke again, because your body's remembering what it was like to have food poisoning. And so you don't have anything to do with it. What therapy can do is, one, you can break this connection. You can say, well, yes, I did have food poisoning. And this is often, you accomplish this by making new nodes around this, and then you build the link. You can say, okay, yes, I did get food poisoning, but it wasn't like my fault as a chef. It wasn't the fault of the person who prepared the food or whatever. It's just, it was a shitty thing that happened. People get food poisoning sometimes. And just because I eat lasagna does not mean I'm going to get food poisoning, right? And then you can work to reestablish. So you break the trauma link. So now your brain doesn't automatically go from lasagna to food poisoning. And then you can work probably by like cooking lasagna again to reestablish. Sure, orange is fine. Reestablish that link between your enjoyment of cooking and your enjoyment of lasagna. So this would be like exposure therapy. This would be, all right, let's make some lasagna in a controlled environment that's calm, you're happy. Let's reapproach this topic. Other things they can do is you can have existing connections. Other things trauma can do. You can have existing connections, and then the trauma I think it has to be very severe trauma to completely break the connection. Otherwise, what it can do is it can block it, right? So you might know you like to cook, and you know you like to cook lasagna, but you just feel kind of icky about it. You can do it, but you're like, this is hard. This doesn't feel gross. I'm always worried that I'm going to get myself food poisoning again and whatnot. That's a block, right? It's not as severe as a break in the connection, because your mind still connects these two items in a positive fashion. There's just some negative juju with it. I hope that's an okay thing to say. I'm sorry if it's not. And again, you can mitigate these blocks by either going around them, by forming new connections. So, I don't know, you have a memory about spaghetti and cooking spaghetti, and then now whenever you make spaghetti, you're like, oh, it's just like lasagna. I know it's not for all you cooks out there, for all you chefs. I'm sorry, but this is kind of, we're going off the top of my head right now. So you can move around it, or you can do exposure therapy again, or other forms of therapy to remove the block and reestablish that wholesome connection. Yeah. So and this, I hope this model demonstrates how experience not just only forms memories, but how experience changes your memories, right? And this breaking of connections, this creating blocks, it doesn't always have to be trauma. It happens all the time. You constantly learn new things. You reassociate things. There's a constant barrage of sensory data that you have to interpret and account for. As you get older, this network gets a lot denser, and so you notice these shifts less. And there's just so much going on in your head, and your locus of focus is. I think it gets a bit bigger as you get older, but it's not proportional, basically, to the number of connections and number of nodes you have. It's proportionally, it gets smaller. Even though you might be able to think about more things as you get older, there are just so many more things to think about that you can't think about them all. And so you kind of get in a little niche, and you fall into a little a steady pattern of your daily routine, usually. That's why pulling people out of their routines can be so traumatizing, especially for autistics, is you just feel like a different person at that point. Yeah, so, all right, and then point 6, last point, will/personality. Your will and or personality is the gestalt effect of this memory network. So your consciousness is the sum total of all of these nodes and networks and all the thoughts and the connections banging around in there, and you might only be able to consciously focus on certain areas at any one time. The whole network is still running. Your mind works, a lot of work gets done below the surface that we're aware of. And people call it your subconscious if you want to get Freudian or Jungian or whatever with it. And that's just kind of going on all the time. And then the locus of focus is your forebrain, your conscious focus of this is what's going on in my mind. This is the task I'm immediately focusing on. But and this also explains how triggers happen. Because if we use the lasagna example again, you're walking down the street, you're going shopping for clothes, so something that's completely unfood related. You get a whiff of lasagna, now all of a sudden you're remembering the time you're puking your guts up. It's because and you weren't consciously thinking about lasagna, but your mind took in the sensory data of the smell of lasagna and fired that through your network to see what the heck was going on. I was like, oh no, are we going to puke again? Because that's what happened last time. So, a couple of takeaways from all of this. 1, you can control your mind. It's difficult, it takes practice, but you can do it. You have the power. 2, you have the power to heal your trauma to a degree. Again, it's really hard to do it by yourself because, as we've established, your external circumstances are kind of telling your brain to act in certain ways. And without help mitigating those while you build up the skills to internally change your circumstances, it's very difficult. Or if you keep being exposed to the traumatizing circumstances, like a lot of us are in this day and age, it might not matter how much you change inside. If you can heal yourself about wanting to make lasagna all you want, but if every time you eat lasagna you get food poisoning, that's going to stick eventually, and it's going to get really, your brain is not going to want to try and tackle that problem anymore. So yeah, and so I don't know if this is the visuality of this helps with people working through the trauma of understanding okay, here's the traumatic events that happened. Let's find some adjacent nodes and either build a circuit around and break the connections with the trauma, or we can do some exposure therapy to saturate the network with other related things so our brain doesn't always take the traumatized path. Maybe it helps you in planning out your healing process. And then the last thing that I kind of want to spitball here is I think DID works in that, because it happens when you're young, it happens when a lot of your core memories are still forming, is when like the initial shock happens that creates the fragmented personalities, is you get, these zones just get cut off, right? And then it's really hard, and they just become separate networks. So you end up with a lot of different networks, and this is like the sharp change in personality and behavior between personalities. And this also explains the memory gaps. So like for me, Sam, our protector, is the one who usually does the driving. And it's taken me a long time for me, Cersei, the nurturer, to be comfortable driving and to build, like I had to learn to drive from scratch. I was a very proficient driver until I went through the big healing process and switched who was the primary host, and so like which network was our main network we were on, and I just forgot how to drive. So I had to learn all over again. But when Sam's there, we know how to drive. So I think it's the brain, and the locus of focus can still jump. And so I think it's the locus of focus. I love saying that. I'm sorry. I don't even know if it's a technically accurate term. Just like saying it. Can jump the gaps. But when it does, you lose access to what's on the previous network. So that's why you have the memory gaps and the behavioral gaps, is because you're not firing with the entire network. Like your data isn't being processed through the entire network, it's just being processed through chunks, and so that's going to change the output, your behavior. So the healing process of DID, where we talk about, it's not possible for everyone, because sometimes the gaps are just too big, or you don't have the support, or there's a million other reasons why you can't. So I'm not trying to say this as like an expectation, just positing a theory of like how this all works. So when we talk about like convergence, people melding back together and you coming down back to one personality, which is like, air quotes, the goal of DID healing, which I have my own thoughts on that, but that's another video. That's rebuilding these connections. That's re-establishing connections of the various networks to a density sufficient enough to not notice gaps in it, basically. But you have to be really careful about that, because like you hook the trauma person back into the network, the trauma host, so for us that's Shadow. You hook Shadow back into our network. Now we have the trauma thoughts all the time. Now we have, the suicidal ideation and the dark thoughts, because before they were very safely segmented and quarantined off in a corner of our brain that we didn't ever touch. And we lost functionality with that, because Shadow, your negative experiences are an integral part to who you are and how you function in the world and how you think. If we didn't have access to that, but it was safer, right? Because we just didn't ever go there, so we never thought about killing ourselves. But now that we have kind of brought everyone back into the fold, more or less, like we are more often Aster than any single one of us these days, that means we have those thoughts a lot. And so now we're kind of reassessing and figuring out, like, all right, how do we handle this? How do we have to cope differently now that we're no longer fragmented in the same way? I hope that made sense. Like I said, this was just kind of running off my notes. I'll take a picture of my notes. It has my sloppy handwriting, but I'll use it as a thumbnail or something so you guys can take a look at it, and hopefully it's helpful. I hope this made sense. Please ask questions. I love questions. Let me know what you think. I don't know. I'm not going to get published in any journals or anything. This is the closest I'm going to get, probably, but I'd love to have an intellectual discussion about this and what people think about. And like the professionals I have shown this to were very enthusiastic and thought I done something clever. So I hope you do too. And thank you all for listening. Love one another, love yourself, and I will catch you next time.